The door opened and a bell rang with nothing more than a twinkle. Caught by the pale moonlight, it glimmered, an extra star shimmering in the pink twilight of the night. A man limped towards the desk tucked neatly away at the back of the pharmacy. The soft white light of overhead lamps fell calmly onto him, and onto rows of stacked goods. Sat at the polished wooden desk, wearing a pharmacist's cloak, was a woman, not too old, most likely a student, with a freckled face, straight black hair, and deep brown eyes. She glanced up from the mountain of textbooks her face was buried in to see the limping man approaching her. She couldn't see his face. "Good evening, sir. Is there something I can help you with?" the woman called out. The man reached the desk, his face angled down and completely obscured by a curved baseball cap. "What's your name?" asked the man with a peculiar softness, although the young woman wouldn't be able to say how. She folded the topmost textbook of the pile and stood from her chair, leaning onto the desk with a certain childlike innocence. "Kyoto," replied the woman. "Oh, like the city?" "Yeah, like the city." There was an awkward pause. Kyoto flashed a smile. "Sir, are you looking for anything in particular? Do you have a prescription I can look at, maybe?" The man exhaled and reached into his back pocket. His tie swung like a pendulum, backwards and then forwards as he presented Kyoto with the folded piece of paper in his hand. She took the note, then undid the crumpled mess with finesse. "That's your enzine. Is that what you're looking for, Mr.?" Kyoto trailed off. "Tenchi. Yes, that's the one. How much do I owe you?" Mr. Tenchi asked. "Well, let me just check to make sure we have some in stock. It's been selling quite a lot since it came out, you know," said Kyoto with a swift turn to the door behind her. "Just a minute, please, Mr. Tenchi," she said, not lifting her eyes from the prescription in her hand as she pushed through the double door. Mr. Tenchi leaned forwards, letting his elbows rest on the wooden desk. His shirt was beginning to fade around the elbow area. He took a look around the pharmacy. It was well kept, high class. It had a tree growing happily in a plot of soil in the corner. He looked above to see a portrait of Kyoto, framed with an inscription that read, "Our pharmacy student intern is willing to help. Pretty girl. Pretty name." "Okay, Mr. Tenchi, so it looks like you're in luck," said Kyoto from behind the door. She pushed through it and continued to say, "As for the price, I'm sorry to say, but it looks like the company that produces these has just lifted them on us. I'm not sure how much your doctor said they'd be, but right now a box is running for about 200. She finished. Mr. Tenchi sighed. Kyoto was surprised by the amount of air he held in his lungs. "That's almost double what my doctor said they'd be." "I'm sorry, Mr. Tenchi. It's really unfairly priced in my opinion, but I can't break store policy and sell it to you for less," replied Kyoto. She leaned onto the desk herself and brought herself to eye level with Mr. Tenchi. He lifted his head up to reveal his face. His mouth stretched nearly from ear to ear. His teeth were sharp and pointed. His eyes were black, lifeless. Kyoto's eyes widened. She felt her legs tremble. She quickly darted her gaze over Mr. Tenchi's shoulder and clenched her jaw. If you still have enough, I can gladly write you up, Mr. Tenchi." Kyoto managed to stammer out through fragmented chunks of speech. Mr. Tenchi focused all the effort of his gaze into her eyes. "Look at me," said Mr. Tenchi softly. Kyoto's gaze moved to his other shoulder, then to his tie, then fumbled slowly upward. "It's just how I look. Relax. I won't hurt you. You're curious, aren't you? Afraid, but curious?" Kyoto slowly nodded. "It's a result of my illness. They call it spiritual corruption, whatever that means. Anytime I go too long without that medicine..." Mr. Tenchi gestured with his head towards the small box in Kyoto's hands. "My symptoms are revealed." Those symptoms," Kyoto said. "Yes, these ones. I look like a monster. I'm well aware." Kyoto giggled, although whether it was a genuine or nervous giggle, she didn't know. She closed her eyes tightly, composed herself, then opened them. "Have you been like this your whole life?" asked Kyoto. Mr. Tenchi nodded. "How much are you prepared to pay?" Mr. Tenchi reached into his pockets and pulled out a wad of bills totaling $150. Clicking her tongue, Kyoto reached into her own pocket and pulled out her wallet. She sifted through the bills and collected $50, leaving her wallet almost empty. She gave the money to Mr. Tenchi, who gave a wide grin in return. Kyoto's eyes widened, but she tried her best to conceal how she felt. Mr. Tenchi then handed the bills to her, and Kyoto ran it through the cash register and handed him the box. The receipt printed slowly, each line of ink taking its sweet time to be transferred onto the paper passing through the machine. Kyoto tapped her finger. Mr. Tenchi simply stared at her and smiled. Finally, the receipt was done, and a bizarre silence fell into the shop. Okay, Mr. Tenchi, and you're well aware of the side effects, how to take the medication, the like? Yes, said Mr. Tenchi. Lowered blood pressure, itching eyes, talking animals, muscle weakness, the like? Mr. Tenchi ravaged through the box, then at a turtle's pace, gently lifted a single vial out of it. He brought it up to his beady black eye. He smiled. I can't tell you how much this means to me, Kyoto, he said. Kyoto gave a short bow and a sheepish smile. It was my pleasure, Mr. Tenchi. I want to make it up to you, smiled Mr. Tenchi as he put the vial carefully back into the box. If you were to wish for anything, what would it be? I haven't given it much thought lately, if I'm being honest, Mr. Tenchi, but please. It's all right. I just wanted to help. The sprinklers by the tree turned on. Kyoto and Mr. Tenchi exchanged awkward smiles while listening to the sound of water being misted into the air. Don't lie to me, said Mr. Tenchi. Everyone has something they think about, something to wish for. Kyoto looked to the floor. It's not something material. So there is something, asked Mr. Tenchi. Kyoto nodded, Mr. Tenchi nodded, and then turned away, slowly limping towards the exit, leaving Kyoto nothing but short of words. Consider it done. The door opened, the bell rang out, and Kyoto lifted her head from the pile of textbooks in front of her. Removing a page of paper that had stuck to her cheek, Kyoto could make out the silhouette of a four-legged animal coming towards her. An animal? Kyoto jumped up. How did you even get in here? She cried, rushing towards the dog. With each new step the dog took, a new muddy mark was left on the clean and shimmering tiled floor. Stopping to sit, the dog watched Kyoto intently as she came towards it. Stopping just before it, she dropped to her knee. Look at what you've done. You know, I have to clean this all up, right? Pouted Kyoto. Sorry, replied the dog. Kyoto blinked once, then twice. Kyoto was speechless. About the mess, that is. I'm here to deliver a message. Go on, said Kyoto, her voice a perfect indication of her confusion. Mr. Tenchi would like to remind you that you still have a wish to make. Scoffing, Kyoto crossed her legs and ran her hand through her hair. But he forgot to mention there is a caveat. Of course there is, said Kyoto, rolling her eyes. Should you have been helping Mr. Tenchi out of your own selfless will to help, then proceed in making your wish. If you helped Mr. Tenchi because of some other reason, then be careful. Your wish might not end up as you expect it to, spoke the dog. Kyoto pursed her lips. She thought about the night she was having, being careful to remember every detail. She hadn't ingested any of the medication she passed on to Mr. Tenchi, and she hadn't taken a single drop in her life. She was tired, but she had a good night's sleep the night before. The metronomic chirping of crickets outside permeated into the pharmacy. The leaves in the trees outside rustled to and fro in the delicacy of the breeze that flowed through them like water sifting through stones in a river. How do I make my wish? Kyoto asked. Are you sure you want to? Replied the dog with its own question. I don't know, said Kyoto as she stood up. She made her way to the broom closet where she retrieved a clean mop and a bucket filled with a soapy solution. She started cleaning the mud the dog tracked in. Excuse me, I don't want anyone to slip on the mud you brought in. Dipping the mop into the bubbling solution, Kyoto mopped one trail of mud after the other with determination. From beneath each puddle of mud there was a faint shimmer of the floor's original gleaming cleanliness. Very considerate of you, laughed the dog, its tail wagging melodically with the chirping crickets. In that case, make sure you clean up what I leave on my way out. Then with one last wag of the tail, the dog slipped through the door. The bell rang out one final time. Kyoto wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, simply listening to the shimmering of the wonderful bell on the door. She wondered when she would get to hear it again. Come to think of it, she wondered when she would encounter another person. She looked out the glass window of her pharmacy, taking in the vast rolling hills and rivers surrounding her in every direction. They were never ending. Kyoto thought to herself how excited she was for summer to end so she could go back to the city and back to school. She was tired of studying ahead for her classes. She was tired of being alone in the pharmacy. The serene sound of the bell faded completely, and Kyoto stopped hearing it in her mind's ear. Flashing a glance to the clock on the wall, she gripped her mop. It was 11:11 in the evening.